Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, a really pressing global issue. Is the growing scarcity of fresh water going to lead to conflict? Maybe even war?
It's a huge question right now.
Definitely. We've looked into some crucial information that discusses where these tensions might be building and, whether we should really be expecting large-scale water wars or if it's more about localized disputes.
Which can be just as serious, of course.
Absolutely. So our mission today in this deep dive is to sort of cut through the headlines, understand what's driving water scarcity, and pinpoint the regions most at risk. Sound good?
Let's get into it. What's immediately striking, I think, is just the sheer scale of this potential crisis.
Yeah.
The UN, they predict that by 2025, and that's really just around the corner.
Right.
Two-thirds of the world's population will likely be living in water-scarce areas.
Two-thirds. That's incredible.
And it gets worse if you look a bit further out. By 2030, the projection is that maybe 700 million people could be displaced. Simply because they don't have enough water. I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
Having to move or, potentially fight for the most basic thing you need to survive.
700 million people. It's almost impossible to comprehend that scale. Okay, so let's just underline this. Water. It's not oil. It's not gold.
Yeah.
It's absolutely essential for life. So when we talk about scarcity, we're not just talking about like a commodity shortage.
Not at all. We're talking about a fundamental threat to human existence. The stakes really couldn't be higher.
So that brings up the term we hear a lot, water wars. What does that actually mean in reality?
What's interesting, when you look back, say, over the past 50 years, we actually haven't seen a classic war between nations fought only over water.
Really? Yeah, one.
Not solely over water, no. Real-world international conflicts are usually much more complex, a mix of politics, economics, social issues.
Okay, so the image of armies clashing over a river, that might be a bit too simplistic.
It probably is, yeah. Our sources suggest it's more nuanced. Water scarcity can be a huge destabilizing force within countries.
Ah, okay.
Internally, exactly. When communities are struggling for something so vital, it can just erode social order, security. And that can lead to internal conflicts.
Which could then spill over borders.
Potentially, yes. So it's less about, state versus state directly fighting over water rights and more about these wider security problems that scarcity creates.
That's a really important distinction to make. So if we're looking for potential hotspots, then where should our focus be? Where are these? What did the source call them? Hydropolitical interactions.
Yeah, that's the term. Basically, where water and politics collide.
Right. Where's that most likely?
Well, back in 2018, research highlighted several key river basins as being particularly at risk. Places like the Nile, the Ganges-Brahmaputra, the Indus, the Tigris-Euphrates, and even the Colorado River in the U.S.
And what makes those basins stand out?
The big thing is they're all transboundaries. They flow through multiple countries.
Ah, so what one country does upstream
Massively affects those downstream.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, think about the Indus. You've got long-running tensions there between India and Pakistan over water sharing.
Right, okay. Those are critical lifelines for huge regions. Let's maybe zoom in on one example you mentioned that's highlighted in our info, Sudan, where the blue and white Niles meet. What's happening there?
Yeah, Sudan is a really stark and quite tragic example of how water stress can fuel conflict.
Historically, too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Competition over the Nile Valley goes way back. Ancient disputes between Nubia and Egypt even.
Wow.
But much more recently, the lack of both water and usable farmland has been a major driver of violence between communities.
Like in Darfur.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The conflict in Darfur, starting around 2003, I mean, the estimated death toll is horrific, maybe 200,000 people. And it's deeply, deeply intertwined with this fight for resources.
200,000, that's just, yeah. And it's not just historical echoes. Are there more recent examples?
Oh, yes. In the early 2000s, there was significant fighting in Sudan's dry dock port region. It was mainly between nomadic herders and settled farmers.
And water was a factor.
A major factor. Climate patterns were changing, resources were getting scarcer, competition ramped up. It wasn't the only reason for the violence, of course, but scarcity was undeniably a key trigger. Hundreds of thousands were displaced.
And these kinds of clashes, are they still happening?
Sadly, yes. These localized fights continue. It really highlights how access to water is just fundamentally linked to land value, to survival, especially for rural communities.
It really drives home that these aren't just abstract theories. It's real people, real livelihoods at stake.
Precisely.
And the big worry, I guess, is that climate change could just pour fuel on this fire globally, right?
Yeah.
Amplify these local conflicts everywhere.
That's exactly the concern, which brings us neatly to a major international flashpoint happening right now, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GEA.
Ah, yes, the GERD. That's constantly in the news. It's on the Blue Nile in Ethiopia.
That's right. And it's a really significant ongoing dispute.
So what's the core issue there? Ethiopia wants power, Egypt wants water. Is that too simple?
That's the gist, but the scale is immense. For Ethiopia, the GERD is potentially transformative. It's this huge hydroelectric project. Plant capacity is 6,000 megawatts.
Wow, how much is that?
That's like the 6 nuclear power stations. It'd be the biggest dam in Africa.
Yeah.
Think reliable electricity, industrial development, jobs, a potential game changer for their economy.
Okay, huge potential benefits for Ethiopia. But then there's Egypt.
Right, and Egypt depends almost entirely on the Nile for its water, like nearly all of it.
Yeah.
Any big reduction in that flow, it could be devastating for their farming, their industry, just daily life for millions.
They often call the Nile their lifeline, don't they? And the Blue Nile, where the dam is, provides something like 85% of Egypt's total Nile water.
That's the figure, yeah. So you can see why Ethiopia's development plans feel like an existential threat to Egypt's water security.
Absolutely. So what's been happening? Egypt's been trying to stop it.
Well, since construction started back in 2011, yes, Egypt has actively tried to halt or influence the project. There were even reports back in 2013, I think, about military options being discussed.
Seriously, military options.
They were downplayed later, but it shows the level of concern. But then in 2019, Ethiopia's president basically said very firmly that no force could stop the dam being completed.
So where are we now? Is it built?
The dam structure itself is largely complete. The really critical phase now, and for the next few years, is filling the massive reservoir behind it.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
How long does that take?
It could take anywhere from 5 to 10 years, maybe longer, depending on rainfall.
Yeah.
And during that time, Ethiopia has to hold back a vast amount of water.
Which means less water flowing downstream to Egypt.
Exactly, especially during dry years. This filling period is seen as a time with the highest potential for conflict.
So these next few years are really crunch time. Ethiopia needs to fill it. Egypt fears a drought.
That's the tension, precisely. And what's fascinating and also worrying is how climate change weaves into all of this.
How so?
Well, basic physics, right? Rising global temperatures mean more evaporation.
Sure.
It disrupts established weather patterns, so you might get more intense rain in some places, but also more frequent and severe droughts in others. It just adds another layer of stress onto already strained water resources.
And like we talked about with Sudan, this isn't some far-off future problem.
No, not at all. Our sources emphasize that many farming communities, particularly in parts of Africa, are seeing major shifts in rainfall right now, today.
And that's directly feeding into conflict?
It seems to be, yes, contributing to clashes over dwindling water sources at that very local level. Climate change isn't just coming, it's here, and it's acting as a conflict multiplier in vulnerable areas.
Okay, so the picture seems quite grim in places, but is conflict inevitable?
Well, that's the important counterpoint. It's crucial to keep perspective. History actually shows that cooperation, not war, has been the more common response when societies face water crises.
Oh, really? That's somewhat reassuring.
It is. I mean, even with all the tension around the Nile Dam, we haven't seen a full-scale war erupt, at least not yet.
Right, not yet. But you're saying the underlying pressures are still building?
They absolutely are.
Right.
Look, we have a planet that's getting hotter, generally drier in many populated areas. Access to fresh water is just becoming harder globally. Then you add the push for economic growth, which often needs a lot of water.
Cities needing more water.
Right. Expanding cities have huge water demands. And then layer over all of that the unpredictable impacts of climate change. You've got this convergence of really powerful forces putting immense pressure on water.
So the argument is that these combined pressures might push things towards more extreme measures in the future, measures to secure water that maybe weren't considered before?
That seems to be the underlying concern, yes. The future might look quite different from the past in this regard.
Okay, so let's try and pull this together from our deep dive today. It seems like large-scale water wars between nations haven't really been the norm, historically anyway.
Right, that direct conflict is rare.
But localized conflicts within countries over water and these really significant international tensions like we see in Sudan or the Nile Basin, those are very real present dangers.
Absolutely. And climate change is like a major catalyst, right? Making scarcity worse, intensifying the competition.
Definitely. But it's also vital to remember, as you said, that cooperation is still possible, and it's often been the way these things are handled.
It's often been the default, yes. Which leads us, I think, to the final thought for our listeners.
Yeah.
Given all these mounting pressures, climate change, population growth, development needs, what kind of innovative solutions, what collaborative strategies are going to be most critical, to prevent these tensions from boiling over into wider, maybe more devastating conflicts in the years ahead?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? How do we navigate this? It really pushes us to think beyond just the headlines about conflict and towards, well, actual solutions for managing this essential resource.